Hi, ladies. This week we're looking at Chapter 4, which focuses on social cognitive theory. It's social because it's the first of our learning theories that really looks at the impact of others on our learning. And what it means by others is not just like in behaviorism as a stimuli in the environment, but how we observe others is an active and vital part of our own experience and what we learn. So social cognitive theory was formulated by American psychologist Albert Bandura. And Bandura developed a comprehensive theory of observational learning. He stressed that much of human learning occurs in a social environment and that we do make that enduring change of behavior and experience by observing others. He said that people learn new actions by observing others without reinforcement and without having to apply or perform what they learned at the time. So this is really key to this theory because in behaviorism, we look at the environment as a stimuli and then our behavior as a response that either has to be followed by a reinforcer if we're talking about operant conditioning, or that at least we can see and observe to know that the behavior has been learned. Social cognitive theory says that learning occurs through observation of others, even if we never perform that behavior. So it really was a takeoff from behaviorism. Some key concepts that social cognitive theory talks about are the concepts of vicarious learning, the concept of modeling, and the concept of self-efficacy. So these are the major concepts out of this theory. Bandura describes what he calls the framework of a triadic reciprocality model of causality. Basically, what he's saying is that human behavior occurs as a result of reciprocal interactions between the environment, which can include models or people that we observe, the person, including that person's own cognitions, their own self-efficacy and other personal factors or characteristics, and behavior, the task or performances expected. And if you look at the way the arrows are going in both direction, one factor may predominate at some point, but in influencing the other factors, but all of that, whether one factor is dominant over another or in what order they go, really depends on the specific situation, the specific environmental factors, the specific person and their cognitions, as well as the specific task or behavior that you're asking the person to perform. So all of those have a reciprocal relationship, and it's very dependent on the individual circumstance. So according to this theory, there are two main kinds of learning, and social cognitive theory defines learning as information processing activity. So it's a cognitive kind of theory, social cognition, in which information about the structure and environment are transformed into models. So we get all of our information through these symbolic representations or models. And these models, as we'll see in the next slide, can be live, they can be non-human, they can be in computer, in writing. He distinguishes inactive learning from vicarious learning. So inactive learning is learning by doing and experiencing the consequences or reinforcements and rewards of your own actions. Vicarious learning is learning by observing others and the consequences to their actions. So as I said, those models can be live, they can be non-human, they can be electronic or in print. And for complex skills, typically learning occurs through both inactive learning or our own actions and what we observe others doing, vicarious learning. So central to the concept of self-regulation and self-efficacy, and a key assumption of social cognitive theory is that people need to have personal agency or see themselves, perceive themselves as agents of control over their own behavior and over their own future. So it's this self-agency that really speaks to self-regulated learning, where individuals really are able to sustain behaviors and have the motivation, the cognition, the emotion to achieve goals of their own making. And that because it's their goals and because of self-efficacy and the need for self-agency, that they can regulate their own learning. I think that it was Kim who said, one of the things that she was excited about is the notion that whatever you put your mind to, whatever you have a goal to learn, you have the capacity to learn it. And that's really about this self-efficacy. It's one's personal belief about their capability to learn and to perform actions to the designated or desired level, or what we would call success. So the other key concept here is the concept of modeling. And modeling refers to behavioral, cognitive, and affective changes derived from observing one or more models. Social cognitive theory makes a distinction between modeling and imitation, in that the old or more behavioral view of imitation really relies on the performance of an imitated behavior and its reinforcement. So imitation really says that you do what you've seen somebody else do. Remember, social cognitive theory says that learning takes place in observation even when you don't perform the behavior you have observed. So that really makes modeling different and distinguishes it from imitation. So there are three main functions of modeling. The first is response facilitation, and that's defined as modeled actions that serve as social prompts for observers to behave accordingly. And that this social prompt, this learning, may occur without conscious awareness. I like this example. If you're in a building and you see everybody running in the direction of the back door. You don't see what they're running from, but everybody that you see is running in the same direction toward the back door. Response facilitation says that their actions will prompt you to run in that direction with them, whether or not you ever find out what they were running for. So that's response facilitation. Another function of modeling is inhibition or disinhibition. So inhibition occurs when models are punished for performing certain actions, which by observing that stops the observer from acting accordingly. So an example of this is if you ever have had a older brother or sister and you see that your older brother or sister has behaved in a certain way and they have been punished for it, that observation can in and of itself keep you from doing that behavior. So that's the function of inhibition. Disinhibition occurs when models perform prohibited behavior activities which because there is no punishing consequence, may lead observers to perform the very same behaviors. And I think a good example of this is if you have someone, let's say in your job, that is habitually comes to work between 20 and 30 minutes late. However, they are never get any consequences to this behavior. There seems to be no ramifications for their being not on time. Then that observation may cause other people at the job to say, if they can be late and nothing happens, I can be late too. So that's an example of disinhibition. And then the third function of modeling is observational learning. And this is where observers display or perform new patterns of behavior that prior to seeing or observing others do that would really have zero probability of performing that behavior, even if their motivation was high. So observational learning certainly is what we want to happen when we're teaching and modeling on purpose. But this is where we really can see that what has been observed has been performed and performed accurately. So there are four main processes of observational learning. And again, as teachers, we want to make use of modeling. We want to model behaviors. We want to model performance of tasks that we want our observers, our students, to learn. And so the processes involved in observational learning are attention, retention, production, and motivation. Attention is making sure that the relevant events are meaningfully perceived, making sure that you have your students or the learners or the observers' attention, and that you have created an urgency or that it is important that they attend to what you're saying or what you're doing. The second is retention, and retention requires cognitively organizing, rehearsing, coding, which means getting it into memory, and transforming information for storage in memory. So it's the mental review of the information and ability to organize it, connect it to other things that we know, and rehearse it enough that it's stored in memory and we can pull from that memory of that behavior. Production is really the performance of it. So translating the what you have observed and the conceptions of the modeled event into overt behavior. Production is the process of seeing and then doing what you saw. So doing what you saw. And then finally, motivation is a factor in that it influences observational learning, and that people are more likely to do the first three, attend to, retain, and produce particular behaviors or tasks if they believe that it is important for them. So those are the four processes of observational learning. Cognitive skill learning is just adds another layer to modeling. So rather than just observation, it also incorporates a modeled explanation along with the demonstration through verbalization. And often it involves the model or the teacher not only showing what they want to be done, but talking about why they are doing it the way they're doing it, talking through their thoughts and their reasoning for performing a certain action. Adults often, in adult learning, adults need to know, why is this important for me? So as you're demonstrating something, you want to talk about the reason that I'm doing this way, blah, blah, blah. For example, I remember in learning algebra, I think relearning it for statistics, actually, the teacher would say, in an algebraic equation, they'd show and tell, I do this first, because if you do what's in the parentheses first, then that helps you to get the correct answer. And so I do this first because this is what we want to do first, and then I do minus, and then whatever else I've discovered in the parentheses, and then I go over to the other side of the equal sign. So they not only showed what to do, but gave the reasoning for why you do this first and why you do this second, etc. And then self-instruction is designed to teach students then how to regulate their own activities during learning. So self-instruction includes several procedures. They are cognitive modeling. So in self-instruction, first the teacher, let's say, would verbalize as well as demonstrate the behavior that they want the student to perform. Then the second procedure is overt guidance. Then the teacher would verbally go through the steps and have the student actually do the steps, so in active learning. Then overt self-guidance is the third step, and then the student would verbalize as well as demonstrate what they're doing. Then the next step is faded overt self-guidance, where the student might whisper the steps while they're performing the behavior. And then finally, and what you want to arrive at, is covert self-instruction, where the student performs the behavior without verbally walking through the steps. So that's self-instruction. The example that came to my mind was learning how to drive, and having a teacher who would first demonstrate and talk through what they were doing. First, I'm going to turn on my blinker, and then I'm going to check both my mirrors. Then I'm going to turn around and look behind me and all of that. And then they might walk you through that process as you have the steering wheel. And so finally, you're able to do all those things without saying them out loud. So that's the process of self-instruction. So in addition to having models and the way that models may cognitively walk a student through, there are other influences on whether modeled behavior can be learned or performed. And so some of these factors affecting whether learning and performance of that occurs is certainly the developmental issues or factors that come into play in performing or learning the task. So, for instance, developmentally, a child may not be able to have the length of attention that you're requiring them to have in order to learn the behavior correctly. So that's important to understand developmentally what you can expect. And when you're dealing with students who may have specific developmental delays, you want to take that into consideration as to whether or not they can learn and perform what you have shown them or what they have observed you doing. The second factor or influence on whether or not someone can learn or perform what has been observed is model prestige and competence. Research has found that really observers pay greater attention to those models who have higher status or are seen or believed to be more competent in being successful at what they are doing. So it makes me think about how students might react to a substitute teacher differently and learn differently from a substitute teacher than they do from their own teacher, because they don't hold them as competent as their regular teacher. Vicarious consequences are the consequences displayed by the model valued by the observer? Are the successful consequences displayed by the model valued by the observer? So, vicarious consequences. Outcome expectations. Observers or learners are more likely to perform modeled actions they believe are appropriate and will result in expected outcomes. So, in terms of expected outcomes and the difference between outcome expectations and goal setting, we talk about that in the next slide. Goal setting is observers are more likely to attend to models who demonstrate behaviors that will help observers obtain their goals. So if my goal is to become, let's say my career is social work, and that's normally what I teach is social work students. So if their goal is to become a social worker, then when I talk and teach about what I have found to be successful in becoming a good social worker, students are more likely to pay attention to that and to attend to me as a model than someone who is maybe not practiced as a social worker. And then finally, self-efficacy. And we've talked about self-efficacy before, but really the importance of the observer's belief that they are capable of achieving what the behavior is that the model is showing them or demonstrating. So the degree of self-efficacy that the student or the learner has really makes a difference in terms of their ability to learn or their desire and motivation to learn and to perform what they have observed. So just to clarify goals from outcome expectations and values. So goals really reflect the learner's purpose and refers to the quality, quantity, or rate of performance. Goals tend to be motivators for people that are needed to put forth the effort it takes to achieve them. And so if the demonstrated task or behavior meets with what are the goals of the observer, they're more likely to be motivated to learn and then to perform. It says read goal properties. The 3 goal properties are specificity, proximity, and difficulty. And basically, these properties enhance the student's motivation and their self-efficacy to learn what it is the behaviors or the tasks are that you're teaching. So specificity means the more specific the standards of performance, the more they know exactly what they have to do to meet the standards, the more likely they are to put forth that effort. Proximity means kind of close, they can achieve it close to when they are learning it. So it's more about short-term goals and short-term progress, rather than things that are too far in the future for them to expend the energy to try to achieve. And then difficulty, that there's a point where when you have high standards and high expectations, and the difficulty is enough to motivate, and then there's a threshold above which students may feel that they don't have the capacity to learn or to achieve, and that becomes less motivating for them. And then finally, outcome expectations is really about what the observer personally believes are the anticipated outcomes of their actions. And these expectations are important because they help them kind of form maps for whether or not they're going to achieve it, and how they think they will be able to, and when they will be able to achieve it. So again, that's tied into self-efficacy, because if they believe that they can achieve the outcomes that they're expecting, they're more likely to be motivated to do that. And I think in your book it gives a picture of a rat who's learned something another way, but then kind of figures out how to get to their expected outcome a different way. And then lastly, values. That is it important for the learner? Does it feel useful to them what it is you are modeling for them to learn? So those things become important in terms of motivation, in terms of putting out the energy that they need to put out to learn and perform the behaviors that they're being taught. So this is really around how self-efficacy interacts with the models and the modeling of behavior. It really, the interaction between self-efficacy and models really speaks to the importance of knowing your audience, thinking about who they are, and what it is you're wanting them to learn, and whether or not that is possible for them, and whether or not they think that's possible for them. So some of the things that research indicates that is exposing students, and in this case the research is talking about children, to adult models tends to influence their self-efficacy. So when they see that there are adults who have been successful in the areas that they would like to be successful at, it tends to make that model more effective. Observing similar peer models performing a task well can raise the observer's self-efficacy. So if they see that their friend, their partner, let's say a lab partner, or someone that they know, or a peer who seems to be somewhat like them in the same kind of situation, maybe around the same age, can be successful at performing a task, it will make them feel that they too can achieve that. Kind of, if they can, I can too. Self-efficacy and achievement are raised more by observing a peer model than observing a teacher or no model. Interesting. So it's important in our teaching then to make sure that we are using peers and their success or their ability to perform it in helping others to model after them. Teachers, however, are better than no models at all. And then compared with just a single model, if there are multiple models, it increases the probability that the observer will perceive themselves similar to at least one model. So for me, this concept of self-efficacy and who the models are that our students are observing, how similar to themselves they see models, how similar to their own experiences they see models, can really influence whether or not they see themselves as capable of learning and performing the same behaviors and tasks that made the model successful. And that's important to motivating and helping them to achieve their goals. Finally, again, how does this all work in terms of our roles in teaching? Is there are teaching strategies right now that really utilize social cognitive theory. First is working examples. So I think my example about teaching algebra and how you can create working examples that students can both see and have you verbally walk through a process or a task step by step so that they can then do some self-instruction and learning around that. Tutoring is also another strategy that uses modeling to help students to learn, so that you have somebody there who you establish some kind of working relationship with anyway, that is able to explain and demonstrate the behavior as well as provide feedback on the observer's progress. Mentoring, the same kind of thing, usually used in professional and personal development or in professional and personal lives, but usually it's someone who you see as more experienced, more capable, who's doing something that you also want to do, but who can become a model for you, who becomes a mentor for you, and who you can learn vicariously through. And then I added coaching, not mentioned in the text, but in industry today, in many fields, they are using not only in classroom training and modeling, but the whole concept of vicarious learning and the social learning in coaching. They're using coaches to supplant in classroom teaching, on the job, in the field, so that someone can provide cognitive modeling as well as provide immediate feedback and self-correcting feedback to those who are learning a new skill or task. So with that, those are the things I think are the main points. You'll also, at the end of every chapter, I think it's a really good idea to look at the summary of the chapter, as well as what the model has to say about learning, motivation, memory, and those other aspects of learning that we talked about at the very beginning. Hope you have a great week. And again, any questions, please do email me and let me know. Bye-bye.